Early in the summer, a few years ago, I started dating this girl whose mother worked at the local flea market. The girl, let's call her Tiffany, and I had been dating for a few months when she asked me if I would like to come help her work with her mom. I certainly didn't want to sacrifice one of my precious Saturday mornings to go work all day at a dusty flea market, but I really liked this girl, and to be perfectly honest, I wanted to get into her pants. So I decided to go. That's how I found myself on my way to the crap hole flea market at 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday that I really wished I had slept in on. We opened her mom's store at 8, waited for customers for a while, but when it got close to 10 and only one woman had shown a passing interest in the handmade ashtrays her mom was trying to sell, she told Tiffany and I that we could go and take a look at the rest of the place. Tiffany and I walked for a while, but we didn't find anything of interest. There was a movie store that had pretty much every movie you could think of, but so did I at home, so no help there. Both of the bookstores were a bust, finding nothing interesting but some old Stephen King novels that I already owned, and a crotchety old man who watched us like a hawk. Probably because we were some damn teenagers, who of course would go out of our way to steal an old dusty book, barely held together with spit and goo. We had meandered our way through most of the building when we happened upon a small shop that was selling exclusive, rare, hard-to-find TV props, according to the very loud banner stretched across the top. "Want to go in?" I asked Tiffany. "Nah, I have to use the bathroom. You can go in, though." "Oh, fine. Make me go into the shady store all by myself," I joked. "You'll be fine. Go." "Do I have to?" "Yes, you have to go inside." "I'll be right back." She gave me a playful slap and walked away. As I walked into the dingy booth, the owner gave me a grim nod without a smile. I didn't really see anything of interest at first. They really did have some obscure stuff, such as old plush dolls from Rocco's Modern Life and Ren and Stimpy. There were some old Pokemon playing cards. Not sure if that counted as rare TV props, but it was still cool. And even some of the old Nickelodeon-themed board games. I had several nice hits of nostalgia, but nothing really stuck out at me, enough to make me want to buy it. I was about to walk out when the owner said, "Hey, I got some stuff right here behind the counter." He pulled out a box of assorted dolls and junk and dropped it carelessly on the counter. "Ain't had a chance to put 'em away yet, but you can look." I half-heartedly picked through the box out of politeness, but I really just wanted to get out of there. I pulled out a couple of old Rugrat dolls and a Squidward doll that had an odd red stain on its head, and was about to say, "No thanks," and put them back, and get out of there when I saw something that hit me with such an intense blast of nostalgia that I almost fell over. A dirty white skull stared at me from the bottom of this box. His huge black glass eyes that were entirely too large for his head. Just as I remembered, I reached down and picked him up, almost forgetting the entire world around me as I looked over the thing I had completely forgotten about until this moment. The tan top hat and cape, made of some sort of roughest leather I've ever felt, was sewn up in the same crazy patterns I remembered so vividly from my childhood. As I rubbed some of the dirt off his body, noting the feeling of a rough little bump on his hat, and the leathery stitches holding together his clothing, I noticed that his jaw didn't open all the way. Instead, it barely opened just a bit and slid sideways from left to right, making an almost unpleasant grinding noise. Every detail was exactly as I remembered. "Well?" I jerked out of my stupor with a start. Looking stupidly at the owner, I used every ounce of intelligence I possessed to come up with something. What?" I said, "Are you gonna buy it or just stand there all day and molesting it? Come on, kid, I want to go to lunch." Yeah, I'll take it." There was no way I was letting this go. "Would you happen to know if this is, actually from the show?" "Kid?" I really wished he would stop calling me kid. Just because he was probably in his late 50s doesn't mean he can address me at 26 years of age as a kid. I don't even know what show it's from. All this crap is my brother's. He would tell you that it's all the real deal, but I just want to get rid of it." "Well, I hate to be a bother, but is there any way I could get in contact with him? This show doesn't even... Well, I just need to know if this is actually from the show." "Can't. Dead. 3 months now. And the doll is $10. Take it or leave it." I handed the rude owner the cash and left the shop with the doll deep in thought. There was no way this doll should even exist. That show didn't exist. There was no way it did. I had dreamt it all, hadn't I? I mean, all that screaming. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even see Tiffany until she was almost right in my face. "Oh, hi." "Hi. Did you actually find something in that shady store?" Yeah." I told her about the doll. She didn't recognize it, but I didn't really expect her to. Our conversation quickly turned to other things, such as the creepy old lady she had encountered in the bathroom, who had taken up 15 minutes of her time asking too many personal questions. We finished out the day. Her mom thanked us for our help, and we spent the day together. Anyway, that night when I got back to my apartment, I pulled out the doll. Something I'd been dying to do all day but had avoided so I didn't seem like a freak, and gave it a closer look. I couldn't get over how genuine the cape felt. I loved the feeling of running my fingers over it, enjoying the smooth yet rough texture of the stitches. The top hat was removable, and the glass eyes were indeed made of really thick glass. It was all as I remembered. I was in utter shock even still. How did this exist? I sat on my couch and began thinking about the show, Candle Cove. God, I hadn't thought about that show in easily 15, maybe even 20 years. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7 when it ran. I only remember it being on for a couple of months before it got canceled. I remember greatly enjoying it at the time. I would come home from school, always so excited and always making my mom turn the TV channel to 58 to watch it. I remembered sitting on the floor, way too close to the TV, watching her turn the dial with her finger that had a mole on it. Always the same way every time. Yeah, I'm old enough that the TVs of my childhood still had manual dials instead of a remote, so sue me. I chuckled to myself. I hadn't thought about that for so long. I missed my mom, thinking back on it now. She had passed away about 5 years ago from skin cancer, and it had hit me hard. She had always been such a big influence on my life. She would always tell me about what an imagination I had, and how she just knew it would take me far. I wish she had lived long enough to see me graduate college and land a job at a small independent film company where I edited movies. It certainly didn't make me famous or anything, but it paid very well, and I was responsible for some of the better editing in many different films, some of which I knew she would have loved to watch. I missed her terribly. I missed how, when I was sad, she would pretend to draw on my face, and I would always watch the mole on her finger as it traced my face because I thought of her. Freckle Mountain, as I called it. It was pretty cool. I missed the way she would chuckle and shake her head at me as I watched the show, remarking on what big imagination I had with my little pirate show. I had always wondered what exactly she meant by that, but the older I got, the more I realized it must have been all in my imagination. The whole thing. The entire show must have been me just thinking too much or something, because no way that there could have aired that episode. The one with all the screaming. All the characters screaming bloody murder and jumping and flailing. I remembered vividly the horrible feelings I got from that episode. And even as a child, I thought it was strange. Things like that don't even get aired today, much less way back in '71. I must have been rubbing my finger over the doll's face again. I hadn't noticed what I was doing until I felt a strong pinch. I grasped and looked down and quickly pulled my finger out of the doll's mouth. What the fuck? Why did that hurt so bad? The teeth weren't sharp or anything. I hadn't even realized I'd put my finger in there. I must have bumped its jaw or something and pinched myself. I sighed and shook my head at my own foolishness and went back to looking at the doll that was responsible for so many of my childhood nightmares. I examined the doll's mouth. I found myself wondering why it only moved side to side. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more the memories came flooding back. The laughingstock. Jesus, that old piece of shit pirate ship that was always so close to falling apart. That Ed Wynn voice it had, telling the pirates they had to go inside someplace and face the danger. Usually the skin talker, whose image I had held in my very hand. I remember Janice, the little girl from the show, asking the skin taker why his mouth moved like that. God, what was it he said? I strained the muscles of my memory until I suddenly got goosebumps when the phrase drifted through my mind, leaving icy trails of fear running down my back. To grind your skin. It was a cheesy thing to say, but there was nothing cheesy about the way he had glared so silently into the camera with his evil black eyes, almost challenging someone to defy him. Shaking off my childish fears, I tossed the doll on my coffee table and went to go take a shower. I needed to clear my head, but the entire time in the shower my thoughts only wandered more and more. I started remembering more about the final episode that aired, and the way that all the puppets and Janice had screamed and thrashed and shook so violently. There hadn't even been a plot or anything. The entire episode had consisted of nothing but the characters screaming and crying, and it was all so chaotic and traumatic. I remembered how I had started to cry, and my mom had run in from the other room asking what was wrong, and I told her through the tears how Janice was crying, and no one was helping her, and my mom had turned off the TV, picked me up, and made me feel better. Then she went and put me into bed, tracing my face with the finger until I fell asleep, and had terrible nightmares all night long about the skin taker chasing me and screaming incessantly. All these thoughts ran through my mind, and even though my shower water was pretty hot, I still had chills all over my body. It didn't help when I turned off the water, and I could hear my TV was on. I froze. I knew I hadn't left my TV on. I hadn't even turned it on since I got home. I had simply walked through the door, sat on my couch, and looked at the doll, and knew I had never even touched the remote to the TV. I slowly got out of the shower and dried off, listening carefully to the sounds coming from the living room. I couldn't believe my ears. Calliope music! The last set of memories came with a refreshing course of nostalgia. My mother's finger, the one with the mole that had always comforted me so, turning the dial to the station with all the static. The station always had static. I remembered that. Until 4, when Candle Cove came on. There was never anything but static. But when Candle Cove came on, the Calliope music, ridiculously happy, would start to bleed through the static. Slow and distorted at first, but speeding up and being more bouncy as the picture cleared, and Pirate Percy and his friends greeted Janice to a new full day of adventures. Now I suspected that it had always been static, even when the show was on. Maybe that's why my mother had shaken her head and laughed at me. But if it had always been static, where did the doll come from? How did it even exist on the show? I was so confused. And the stupid catchy music coming from my living room was not only making me more confused, but it was creeping me out a bit too. Shaking off my thoughts, I opened the door and heard the tail end of the sentence spoken in a voice that sounded like Ed Wynn. "Go inside," it was saying. I stepped out and slowly walked to the living room. My hallway was ridiculously long, and it only served to increase my tension, but just as I rounded the corner, the TV turned to static. As the only light in the room was the whiteness from the static on the TV, I got really creeped out. I rushed to the lamp and flicked it on, and saw that the doll was exactly where I'd left it, right on top of their remote. I sighed in relief and shook my head in embarrassment. It all made sense now. I had simply thrown the doll on the remote, and the force of its impact had turned on the TV. I simply haven't noticed because my TV takes forever to turn on, and by the time it had, I was in the bathroom. It had been staticky the entire time, and it was simply my confused, slightly disturbed thoughts and emotions that had projected the noises that I heard into my brain. I really needed to get some sleep. I knew it wasn't a good idea to wake up at the crack of dawn to go to the flea market. I could have slept in all day and avoided this whole mess. There would be no questions about where the doll came from, or if the stupid fucking show even existed, or what all my disjointed, confused memories were trying to tell me. everything would have been all right if I had just slept in. Sound advice for life: only sleep in. This is all stuff I tried to tell myself to relieve the creepy feelings I had. And it almost worked. It had almost worked, and my heartbeat had finally slowed, and my blood pressure was normal, and the goosebumps had finally gone away, and all the things I told myself had made me feel better. My justifications and explanations had almost made me feel better, until I picked up the doll and started running my fingers over it again. I started playing with the funny little bump that was on the top hat again, and I remember being extremely comforted. All the bad feelings suddenly went away, and I felt so much better. All was well. The show probably had simply existed in another format, and since I was so young, my confused mind had simply combined my memories with something else and projected them over the show, giving me all these confused feelings. I would simply get dressed, get on my computer, and look up the show, and put all of this crap to rest. Maybe I would even throw away the doll. It would be for the best. I shouldn't have even bought it, but now that I had, $10 was not too much of a price to pay for some peace of mind. I got up to put the doll in the trash, but the towel wrapped around my waist started to unravel, so I reached to grab it and dropped the doll. Tonight was just not my night. I bent down to pick up the doll and his top hat, which had fallen off. It was then that I got a good look at the hat. When it was separate from the menacing black eyes and that demanded all my attention before, I had been playing with the funny little bump on the hat, and I had felt an intense sense of comfort as I did so. When I looked at the top hat, I realized why. With a sudden blast of recognition and fear, what with my memories had been trying to tell me, I realized what it was about the funny little bump that had given me comfort. It was the same bump that I had stared at for endless hours as a child, in times of happiness, sadness, pain, and fear. The funny little bump was my mother's mole.